So, as is often the case, unfortunately, we're less than 1 week out from a mass shooting. And so that is something that is on my mind personally, and certainly on the mind of the media who've covered it. And when you consider the fact that studies have shown that the coverage of these sorts of mass shootings can lead to copycat attacks, reporters who want to do the right thing are obviously thinking, well, how exactly can I let people know the facts of these stories without feeling responsible, even in some small part, for future acts of violence? Because that's the last thing in the world that we want. And so Mother Jones, which is one of my favorite websites, does great investigative journalism, great exposés, reporting, and things like that. They've been doing sort of a long-term threat analysis of what sorts of media coverage can actually contribute to these sorts of copycat attacks and which do not. And because I know that I will cover dozens, perhaps hundreds of these sorts of events in the future, I want to make sure that I'm following their best suggestions, and they have a few. And so I'm going to talk about them today. But in their investigation and threat assessment, they found at least 74 plots and attacks on high schools specifically that could be traced back, by the words of the perpetrator, to Columbine specifically. And obviously this can be the case in other sorts of events as well. And so why, first of all, before I get into the suggestions, of which there are 5 or 6, why talk about it at all? If there seems to be this indication that the coverage can lead to copycat attacks, shouldn't we simply silence ourselves entirely on it? That doesn't seem to me, and I think that a lot of those in the media will say it doesn't seem like the right solution to simply not allow people to know about what's going on, to not have them know that we've got this problem in a state, in the country, that this is something that needs to be dealt with, perhaps urgently because of the severity of the problem, how often the problem crops up. And so we can't simply allow ourselves to go through the world completely ignorant of what's going on, what's driving action across the country. But at the same time, we definitely do not want to encourage acts of a copycat nature. And so let's talk about a few of these. And as I go through these, I'm going to talk about my thought process for how we cover these sorts of mass shootings. And I want to know what you think about what you think the media should and should not be saying in regard to these sorts of events. So the first suggestion, again, from Mother Jones, is report on the perpetrator forensically and with dispassionate language. So don't use terms like lone wolf and school shooter, which might have some sort of special cachet amongst the sort who might commit these acts. Instead, call them perpetrator or act of mass murder or something like that. And this is one that I think I might well have said school shooter or something like that in the past. I think that this is perhaps one of the less egregious things that they list here. But yes, I think that when we use lone wolf or something like that, it gives some sort of, I don't know, some sort of appeal to a certain type of crazy person who feels like, well, I can't make it through life in the traditional way. I need to find some special way to stand out. Lone wolf. That sounds exciting. That could be the name of a movie or a novel or something like that. And so I agree with them that you should be very careful of the sorts of terminology you use and make sure that they don't glorify or glamorize in any way these acts of violence. Number 2 is minimize use of the perpetrator's name. When it isn't necessary to repeat it, don't. And don't include middle names just to distinguish them from other people with the same sort of name, which might make them sound more important. After all, sort of like presidential assassins are often, we use 3 names to refer to them. This is one that, at the very least, myself, and I believe largely the Young Turks, the company that I work for every day, has decided to take on. We are not going to use their names. We want to make sure that they know that if they think they can get some sort of personal fame attached to their name, they are incorrect, and it will not happen. Attached to that, keep the name out of the headlines, of course. Now, some sites, I think somewhat callously, might decide to put the names in because they know that for SEO purposes, people, that when they search for it, they want it to come up based on it being on the headline. I have no interest, and the Young Turks has no interest whatsoever in making extra money off of these sorts of stories, and so no, we're not going to do that if it adds even a small percentage chance to the possibility that someone might commit a copycat attack. Similarly with the name, minimize the use of images of the perpetrator for the same reason as the name. And again, that is something that I myself, and I think the organization I work for, will not be doing. We might have done it in the past, not having thought about the effect that it might have, unfortunately, but I believe that we've learned over time. I don't want them to think that their face, their name, anything specific about them is going to get out as a result of an act of terror like these mass shootings. Avoid using pseudo-commando or other posed photos of the perpetrator. And so in the case of like the Aurora shooter or some of the others where they pose with their guns and they want to feel like they look cool, you know, they're awesome. we don't show those, obviously. I mean, we're not even going to show a picture of their face. We're certainly not going to show the propaganda photos that they took that make it, again, seem sort of glamorous, like they're some sort of freedom fighter or something like that. I'm not going to be posting any of those. And avoid publishing the perpetrator's videos or manifestos except when clearly necessary or valuable to the reporting. I think that it being necessary or valuable to the reporting is going to be extremely rare. And especially in this last case, we did not post any of it. Now, unfortunately, if somebody is completely mischaracterizing what has driven a particular perpetrator, I should say, I want to be careful and start to train myself in this stuff. If they're mischaracterizing it for a political reason, then it might be necessary to, quote, select parts of something like this to prove that the individual who did this was not a part of a certain political group or religious group or whatever. But in general, their message does not get across as the result of killing people. If you want to get published, you can fucking write and edit and get a goddamn agent, okay? And you can try to get it published in the traditional sense. You're not going to get something quick published on either the internet or on TV as a result of killing people. And those are the 6 recommendations. I think that they're all very reasonable. I think that you can give the basic facts about what happened, what could potentially be done to stop it, what could have been done to have stopped it in these sorts of events without ever once glamorizing or even identifying the person who did it. If people want to know that information, they can find it. It will be out there, certainly. But we're not the PR department for psychopaths. And there's no reason why we need to get on board with their manifesto or their message or whatever their bullshit grievance is with popular culture. But I am interested, of course, in what you have to say. So we have to cover a lot of things like this. You've read stories, you've watched videos about many events like this. What sort of coverage do you think is worthwhile or necessary? And what do you think goes beyond that and becomes propagandistic or sensationalistic and is completely unnecessary? I'd like to hear your comments down below.